When you're thinking about creating something, a lot of things can come to your mind. But usually, the one that stood out the most is inspiration. Inspiration is key to create everything: movies, novels, even Flying Gorilla. And as an obvious work of art, Pokemon is no exception. From the cities to the villains, passing through the champions, everything has some kind of inspiration. But obviously, the most important and the most clear of them all is in the Pokemons. Every single evolutionary line has their own inspiration. Could be an interesting one, a fun one, an iconic one, whatever that is. But overall, they're just created to represent something. And I want to talk about those inspirations, because why not? So today, I'm gonna show you the inspiration for every single evolutionary line in the first generation of Pokemon. I'm only doing the first generation because if I try to do something else, I would probably end up assassinating someone. So, without further ado, let's start with starting in Pokédexian order, and yeah, that is a word. I will start with the Venusaur evolutionary line. For a lot of Pokémons, the inspiration doesn't rely on only a single inspiration, but rather multiple of them. And Venusaur is a great way to start. That is because it's based in two things. The first and most obvious inspiration is that the entirety of the evolutionary line is based on frogs. More specifically, the family of the Ceratophrys, also known as Pac-Man frogs. So is Bulbasaur a Pac-Man? And the other inspiration is in flowers. More specifically, the Rafflesia arnoldi. Rafflesia? Rafflesia? Oh my god, I have to put this now. Which means that Venusaur is canonically from both Indonesia and South America. How that works? I don't know. Next, we go with Mr. Privilege itself, Charizard and its evolutionary line. I think that is pretty obvious which is the inspiration of Charizard. Is in its name, is like visible. He and his entire evolutionary line are born out of the flying lizards. What, do you thought that I was gonna give you that distinction of being a dragon? No, Charizard, no, not me, nor no one is gonna give you that distinction of being a oh, god damn it. And to finish off the original starter trio, we had to go with Blastoise, which is inspired by a turtle. What, you didn't notice when word turtle didn't make that clear enough? Following that, we have a couple of pretty easy ones to understand. We have the Butterfree evolutionary line, which is inspired in butterflies. Yeah, not the most interesting one. But hey, at least the Gigamax is inspired by Mothra, which is a kaiju, so I guess that's cool. Beedrill, as its name explains, is based in two things, which are drills and of course, Japanese hornets. Not bees, hornets. Oh, okay. The Pidgeot evolutionary line is based on regular pigeons. The Raticate evolutionary line is based on the Ratus norvegicus, or also known as the Norwegian rats. Funny enough, the Alolan Raticate doesn't have any different inspirations. Spearow and Fearow are mostly inspired by vultures, even though they have coxcombs, which means that they are maybe roosters? Maybe they are big long cock. While the Ekans and Arbok evolutionary lines are based on the Naya Naya, which is also known as the Indian cobra. Yeah, I think that was pretty hard to grasp. I think that you need a really high IQ to understand why is that related at all. And now is when we reach heavy territory, because we're going through the most iconic Pokemon of all time in Pikachu. So iconic that even your grandmother knows who he or who she is. The inspiration for this Pokemon, as insane as it sounds, is not known. It's just a rodent. It's an average rat. However, it has a lot of things that actually inspires. With the cosplay Pikachu, it gives inspiration to a couple of different things: rock stars, the Victorian era, idols, professors for some reason, and to lucha libre, also known as wrestling. It also has inspiration of the protagonist of the story of the Pokemon anime. And you even have a reference with the Gmax Pikachu, which is inspired by Pikachu itself. Yeah, he's so popular that he has an inspiration of itself. What were you expecting? And while its evolutions are still really uninspired, there's also the Alolan Raichu, which has inspiration in surf, which is one of the biggest sports in Alola, or Hawaii, or Alola, whichever you like the most. The Sandslash evolutionary line is inspired by two different types of mammals, which are the giant armadillos and the porcupines, while a variation of its pre-evolution, Alolan Sandshrew, takes it a step further, being inspired by igloos, which is a type of shelter commonly used by the Inuits of North Canadian lands. Both Nidoqueen and Nidoking are inspired by yet another kaiju, this time in Baragon. Both Clefairy and Clefable are inspired by pixies. Yeah! Please don't unsubscribe, sorry for making such an unholy thing. Both Vulpix and Ninetales are inspired by a Japanese myth of the Kitsune, a fox with 9 tails, while its lowland counterparts are inspired by Arctic foxes. Both Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff are inspired by both cream puffs and European rabbits. All of the Zubat evolutionary line is based on vampire bats. The Vileplume evolutionary line is based in the Rafflesia arnoldi. Wait, did we went without half a generation and there's already a repeated team? Paras and Parasect are inspired by both hermit crabs and Ophiocordyceps, which is a type of fungi that controls minds, like a parasite. And Venomoth is inspired by a moth. Yeah, surprising. The inspiration for both Diglett and Ductrio is in moles. More specifically, not the animals, but the moles from the game Whack-A-Mole, while its Alolan forms add the inspiration of the Pele's hair. Now, just like with Pikachu, we have to go with Meowth separately, because it has multiple inspirations. The first one, specifically, is the inspiration from the Manekineko. It's a common Japanese figurine which is said to be a good luck charm, while its Gmax form is based on also cats, just that when you take them from, like, you know, below the arms and they're long. Yeah, it's a fun reference. Persian, on the other hand, is based in both the Persian cats, if its name wasn't clear enough, and in cougars, while both of the Alolan forms of Persian and Meowth are inspired by the British short-haired cat. Psyduck is inspired by a duck, but Golduck adds a little bit further into potentially being inspired by Kappa. And as its name explains, both Monkey and Primate are inspired by monkeys and not apes, but primates. Now, the Arcanine evolutionary line, contrary to the popular belief, is not inspired by dogs, because its inspiration is actually a Shisa, a cross between a lion and a dog from Japanese mythology that is believed that protects from evil. And following the same theme, the Hisuian form of Arcanine, it's also based in another type of lion-dog cross, this time the Komainu. The Poliwrath evolutionary line are based on tadpoles, also known as Poliwogs. Yeah, they were not sneaky with this one either. The Alakazam evolutionary line are based on magicians, while also adding a little bit of meditation when it comes to its mega evolution. Machamp and its forms are based mostly on wrestlers, while the Victreebel evolutionary line is obviously based on flesh. It's obviously based on carnivorous plants, more specifically the Nepenthes. Both Tentacool and Tentacruel are based in Nidarias, also known more commonly as jellyfish, and in spaceships. And to reach the halfway point of the video, we have Golem and its evolutionary line, which are inspired by both golems and just giant boulders. However, its cooler brother, in its Alolan variation, has other two inspirations as well, in both the magnetite and railguns, which is pretty damn cool. Following that up, we have the Rapidash line, which is based in unicorns, and its Galarian form, which is based in also unicorns, but more obviously unicorns. And also My Little Pony, but that's something that they're not gonna tell you. Slowbro seems to be inspired by Sasae, which is another yokai, while its Galarian form is just another way to represent said yokai. Magnemite and Magneton, which are inspired by magnets. Farfetch, outside of the obvious inspiration of a dog, is also inspired by an idiom, which is Kamoga Negi wo Shutekuru, which basically means a dog with a lick, which is pretty damn funny. Doduo and Dodrio are inspired by both dodos and ostriches. Dugong is inspired by both sea lions and sea cows, while Seal is inspired by seals. Both Mook and Grimmer are inspired by toxic waste. Cloyster is inspired by oysters, while Gengar has a much more interesting story, being inspired by both doppelgangers and shadow people, which are formless figures that wander around in the darkness. Onyx is inspired by a snake and also a mineral called onyx. Hypno is based on the proboscis monkey or long-nosed monkey. Kingler is based on a king crab. Voltorb, Electrode, and their Hisuian forms are all based on Pokeballs, with the addition of the Hisuian forms being inspired by the Pokeballs made with Bonguri. Execute is based on eggs, while Executor is based in Jinmenju, which is a Japanese yokai that is also a tree, while its Alolan form is based in both palm trees and a type of tree called Drakina, which is the reason as to why it's also a dragon type. It still doesn't make sense. Marowak is the first Pokemon in which I admit defeat. I did not find any type of specific inspiration for him. However, its Alolan form has another inspiration, which is the Fire Dances, which is a tradition that is very common in a lot of different islands in all of the Pacific Ocean. Now, Hitmonchan is inspired by a boxer, if you didn't notice, and Hitmonlee is inspired by a Blemis. However, they also have some really cool references, even though they're not inspirations per se, which is that Hitmonchan's name is inspired by the actor Jackie Chan, and Hitmonlee is inspired by Bruce Lee. Moving on, we have Lickitung, which is inspired by another yokai, this time the Akaname. The Whizzing evolutionary line, which is inspired by air pollution, and its Galarian form adds further into this concept. Rhyhorn and Rhydon, which are inspired by the Iguanodon. Chansey, which is inspired in your mom. Also, going back to mythology, we get Tangela, which is inspired by Medusa, which is one of the most iconic myths in the entirety of the Greek mythology. We also have Kangaskhan, which is inspired in a female kangaroo. Horsea and Sidra, which are inspired by seahorses, while Golding and Seaking are inspired by koi fishes. While Staryu is inspired by a regular sea star, it is believed that Starmie is inspired by one of the multiple sea stars that have multiple extra arms. Mr. Mime is inspired by a mime, while its Galarian form is actually inspired by a tap dancer, which is a fun reference definitely. Scyther is inspired by a praying mantis, while the beautiful Jinx is inspired by the fashion trend common in young Japanese gyarus called Ganguro, which according to one of the wikis is another way to calling blackface. Electabuzz, it seems to be inspired by some feline traits. Sadly we have nothing here, but we're gonna expand most likely in the next parts with Elekid and Electivire. While Magmar is inspired in a Karura, which is a divine creature with both a human torso and a bear-like head that spits fire. Yeah, that sounds pretty normal. Then we have Pinsir, which is inspired by a European stag beetle. Tauros, which is inspired in a common bull, while its Paldean variations are all inspired in the Spanish fighting bull, also known as Toro Bravo. Oh my god, what a name. And we get to one of the good ones. Both Magikarp and Gyarados are inspired by a Chinese legend known as Liu Tiao Longmen, which is the story of a carp that climbs a waterfall and is rewarded by the gods by making it a sea dragon. Then we have Lapras, which is inspired by the Loch Ness monster, also known as Nessie. Just use it if you're a friend, if you're not, she doesn't like it. Ditto, which is most likely inspired by slime. All of the evolutions, which are inspired by foxes. And no, today I'm not gonna make the Vaporeon joke, please don't ask me that again, please. Then we have Porygon, which is inspired by a dog, for like the 4th time in just this generation, but also is inspired by origami. Then we have the fossil Pokemons of the first gen, which include the Omastar line, which is inspired by the Ammonoids, the Kabutops line, which is inspired by the Mesolimulus, and Aerodactyl, which is inspired by a Pterosaur. We also have Snorlax, which, outside of its reference to regular bears, it has a really cool reference, which is that it's inspired by one of the original workers for Game Freak and the original Pokemon games in Koji Nishino. Yeah, it's very weird to have a just real life regular worker being an inspiration for a Pokemon, but here we are. The legendary birds, weirdly enough, do not have a specific inspiration attached to them, other than just being regular birds. However, their Galarian forms do have them. Galarian Articuno is inspired by a white-throat Magpie jay, also known as Caloshita formosa. Galarian Zapdos is inspired by the greater Roadrunner, also known as Geococcus californianus, and Galarian Moltres is inspired by cormorants, outside of the obvious Phoenix relation. Dragonite is just a regular representation of the European myth of the dragon, while we finally got to the final two, which are both Mewtwo and Mew. We have to go to a similar reference. Mew is most likely inspired by an animal embryo, very likely also to be the one of a cat, while Mewtwo is a clone alternative version of Mew. And outside of that comparison, we know that Mewtwo is inspired by Frieza. Like, it's very obvious, isn't it? Like, just look at him. It's definitely Frieza. Like, you cannot convince me otherwise. What a better way to end this video than with an actual supervillain, and one from Dragon Ball at that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you all enjoyed it. After being for so long without making any of these videos, like long and all that, I might be a little bit rusty, to be honest, but regardless, I hope that it was good enough. So, well, see you next time. Bye bye.